The Marinade.
There's no O in Marinade. Let's try it one more time. Ready? 1, 2, 3.
The Marinade.
Marinade.
Bone marinade. The
That's
Marinade.
The Marinade. With Jason Earle.
Trying to make things right, trying to make things right, to what end?
Welcome to The Marinade with Jason Earle, a free-flowing conversation about the creative process with creative people. This is episode 68, and our guest is Steve Silberman. This is such a thrill, y'all. Steve is an award-winning writer. His articles have appeared in Wired, the New York Times, the New Yorker, the Financial Times, the Boston Globe, and so many other publications. His book, NeuroTribes, The Legacy of Autism and the Future of Neurodiversity, was released in 2015. The book is a bestseller, an award winner. It is critically acclaimed. I read it and absolutely loved it. I also loved his podcast with his good friend David Crosby, which I've talked about on this show before. That podcast is called Freak Flag Flying, and we discussed that in some detail during the show. Steve and I caught up on the Zoom machine back in August of 2020. He from his home in San Francisco, and me from the patio of my favorite bar in the world, Barley and Vine Beer Garden in Orlando, Florida, where the owner, my dear friend Benji Gray, graciously agreed to let me use their Wi-Fi, a reality necessitated by the fact that my internet was down here at Marinade Studios as a result of some less than stellar tree work next door. Follow Steve on Twitter and Instagram. He's an excellent follow on social media. And each of those accounts offers something different. He kind of uses them differently. His Instagram has been a source of light for me of late. And he's just such an outstanding guy, and I'm really grateful for this opportunity. SteveSilberman.com for all things Steve. Everyone, it is my great honor to bring you my conversation with Steve Silberman.
Never felt very afraid. Alien pretending.
Hey everybody, before we get to our conversation with Steve, I want to say some things about the beautiful music that you're hearing. It's by our friends Asleep in Plains, all one word, Asleep in Plains, which is the work of songwriter and multi-instrumentalist James Reed and his creative partner, Philly Kennedy. You can find the guys on all major streaming platforms. Look for a full-length album coming very soon. This song is called Universe. I really dig what those guys are doing, and they're also just really great guys. So check them out, Asleep in Plains, wherever you find your music. All right, y'all, here comes my conversation with Steve Silberman.
You're sky high and you wanna stay up in your universe, in your universe, in your universe. You're sky high and you wanna stay up in your universe, in your
Hey,
Hey, Steve.
how are you? Should I use headphones?
I don't know. It's up to you. You sound good.
You're not getting. Are you getting leakage?
No,
Okay, great.
I don't
Are we
think so.
doing audio or video?
It's just audio,
great.
if that's cool. Yeah, just audio.
Cool.
How
Nice
you
to see
doing?
you.
Yeah, likewise.
Yeah. How am I?
Yeah, how are you?
Well, it's a weird time to be alive, but I had a absolutely wonderful thing happen, or I made a wonderful thing happen yesterday,
Cool. What was
which
that?
is there's a guy in my neighborhood who is the principal cellist for the Santa Cruz Orchestra. And he's been doing free concerts on a stoop about 4 blocks away. But the problem is that he got written up in the newspaper. And so suddenly like hordes of people like started showing up for his free concerts. And my husband and I are both very high risk for COVID. So we can't really hang out in crowds,
Right.
But I got the notion of hiring him really to do a backyard, fully masked, socially distanced concert for just our friends in the building and our next door neighbors and my landlord and my husband and one friend and my sister.
Wow.
And so in the backyard yesterday, under this beautiful Monterey pine tree, he played Bach, the song Strange Fruit, which was made famous by Billie Holiday, a Spanish composer I'd never heard of, just a really lovely repertoire of both contemporary and classical pieces.
Wow.
And it was a beautiful sunny day, and we all, stayed more than 6 feet apart. And it was a moment of humanity in the middle of this crazy BS.
Oh, that's so beautiful. That's perfect place to start too, because I did want to start with music and your love of music and
good.
and all of your connections to all these wonderful people and your relationships with these wonderful people. Music for you, when did you first go, like, because it's obviously a huge part of your life, right? When did you first go, wow, this is something incredibly special to me. This is something that I can really sink my teeth into?
Well, I'll tell you first the embarrassing part,
Okay.
and then the beginning of the cool part. The embarrassing part was that I was a little kid in the late 60s. I'm a so-called trailing edge baby boomer, so I was able to see what was going on in music and culture, and hippies dancing naked in the fountain in Central Park and all that. But I was not old enough to participate. But I heard a couple of songs when I was very, very young. One of them was Candles in the Rain by Melanie, and the other was Atlantis by Donovan. And there was probably also Incense and Peppermints by the Strawberry Alarm Clock. Proto-hippie kitsch, basically. But I bought all of those singles, and I used to weep while hearing Atlantis or whatever. But it was really the first album that I ever bought that completely changed my life in an absolutely permanent way that resonates every single day of my life now because of what happened afterwards. First record I ever bought was Crosby, Stills, Nash & Young's Deja Vu, which is having its 50th anniversary this year. And I can tell you something that is actually of real news value that hardly anyone knows.
All right.
Which is that a multiple CD box set of Deja Vu with extra tracks and outtakes and a huge booklet is coming out later this year. No one knows this yet, actually. Very few people know this. Yeah. But so I bought Deja Vu, and I love the whole album. It's, it's considered one of the classics of the period. But what really got to me was David Crosby's title track for that album, Deja Vu. I just loved the weirdness of it. It's kind of, David uses a lot of kind of jazz chords because he was very influenced by McCoy Tyner, John Coltrane, and he had also been Joni Mitchell's boyfriend briefly, and they were both really into open tunings and non-standard tunings. So their time together, even though it was relatively brief, transformed both of their music for the better. And in fact, David got Joni her first recording contract. So I really got into David Crosby. And in fact, I remembered that I had heard his music for the very first time. A little bit before that, I was in a sandal shop in Provincetown, which is like, Provincetown was a really great hippie place. It was like Greenwich Village North, sort of, in the late 60s. And I had like never heard music as beautiful. And I went up to the counter and I said, what is this music? Like I must have been about 10 or 11. And the guy said something that sounded like a law firm, Crosby, Stills, and Nash. Like, I was like, oh, okay. So Deja Vu got me. And then David, shortly after that, came out with If I Could Only Remember My Name, his first solo album, recorded with, Joni Mitchell, Jerry Garcia, Phil Lesh, Mickey Hart, Grace Slick, Paul Kantner of Jefferson Airplane. Like it was basically the entire generation of psychedelicized folk musicians in the Bay Area. And there's nothing like it. It's still probably it's easily one of my favorite albums, up there with Miles Davis, Kind of Blue, etc. But this is what I didn't expect to happen. So I became a complete teen fanatic fanboy, particularly of David. And, I collected tapes, unofficial live recordings. I had the best Crosby tape collection in America probably for a while. When he went to jail because he had a meltdown in the middle 80s around his use of freebase cocaine, he had a spectacular public fall from grace, went to jail in Texas. I like wrote him a letter, never got an answer, obviously. But this unexpected thing happened, which was after he got out of jail, Crosby, Stills, Nash decided to put together a box set. And a friend of theirs named Raymond Foy, who's also a friend of mine, was consulting with Nash about photos. And because Nash has a great photo collection, Foy is a curator. So they were holed up in a motel in Los Gatos, and they were trying to fill a third CD with rarities, And so Raymond kept telling them, well, Steve Silberman says blah, blah, blah. Well, Steve Silberman says the best performance of blah, blah was in blah, blah. And so they're like, who is this guy? And so they invited me down. I get a call. I'm working as a waiter in a restaurant, right? I literally get a call, Steve, are you available? I'm like, Crosby, Stills, Nash want to meet you. What?
Wow.
So I went down to the hotel. I didn't, by the way, immediately get along with David because he was very guarded. He's kind of famously an asshole to a lot of the public, but he's never been an asshole to me. But when we first met, he was, relatively recently out of jail. He was still very guarded. He'd been a star since he was a teenager in the Byrds, or at least his early 20s. So, it took me a while to get to know him. But what happened was the killer thing. I got him online because I found out that he was a fax addict, as Raymond said. I thought, and when I heard that, I said, fax addict. He should have email. So I got him online, and it turned out to be like, him and the internet was like a fish in the ocean. Like he loves the internet, and even though he'd been kind of had this buffer around him because of his fame, he actually really loves to communicate with people as long as he's, in a safe situation. So we ended up like chatting in Unix chat, if anyone remembers what Unix was, like all night when CSN was on tour in London. And he's now my best older friend. David is absolutely, I'm not even bragging. Like we talk almost every day. And I adore him. Now it's like if he writes a song, he sends it to me to find out if it's good.
Right. That's
so
amazing.
It's a really, and eventually I became a big Deadhead, saw the Dead hundreds of times, Dead and Jerry Garcia band. You might say the vessel in which my soul was formed was Dead shows on LSD, basically, when I was young. And it was sort of psychedelics have been used in traditional indigenous cultures for centuries and millennia, probably, for initiating young people. And so I self-initiated at Grateful Dead shows. And then, virtually everybody who I liked in rock and roll was very influenced by jazz. So then I got into jazz, and now that's mostly what I listen to. I still listen to the Dead. I still listen to Crosby. His next album, which was just finished the other day on his birthday, is going to be great. But mostly what I listen to at home is like Miles Davis, Bill Evans, all kinds of music. And, I guiltily confess that even though I'm a writer, I probably spend more time listening to music than I do reading.
Interesting. Oh, we got to unpack that a little bit then.
Okay.
So actually, I'm going to put a pin in that because I do want to ask you about the Dead, because it seems like I read somewhere or heard you say on a podcast that your first Dead show was like the Dead and the Allman Brothers and the band. Was that, am I remembering
That's true.
that
Watkins
correctly?
Glen, 1973. And believe me, I had no idea what I was seeing.
Oh my gosh.
I lied to my parents because my friend who was supposed to go up there with me copped out at the last minute. I was going to go, So yeah. I took a Greyhound bus up to Watkins Glen from the city. And in a way, it was a miserable experience. The weather was really weird. Like there was a frost in the middle of August. Like it was bizarre. There was a mudslide, I lost all of my sleeping bag. I lost it. Couldn't pee for 36 hours because I was so far from the Portishead. When I finally made it to the Portishead, it was on fire because people had set it on fire for warmth, But I turned out to be a very lucky guy because the Dead played a sound check the day before the official start of the concert. Because there were so many people there, they figured they would entertain people.
Right.
They ended up playing a completely improvised suite of music that is one of the best things that they ever played in their entire life, the so-called Watkins Glen soundcheck. And then, as my life evolved, I was eventually asked to co-produce a box set for the Grateful Dead called So Many Roads, which was supposed to consist of entirely rarities and non-album tracks. And so I actually put the Watkins Glen soundcheck on the box set, and it's now like this legendary piece of music, but it's just gorgeous. And after that, the second concert by them I saw, which was 8674 at Roosevelt Stadium in Jersey City, was famously also one of their peaks, And so the first two Dead shows I ever saw were all-time career-topping, legendary, mythical, shows. Yeah, and so I just kept going, basically.
That's amazing. I know you went to Oberlin, but I don't know if you play. Do you play anything?
No, I don't. And believe me, that's the most frequently asked question that I've ever asked, other than, do you have an autistic child? Because I have a book called NeuroTribes about autism. Right. And I don't.
Right.
But,
and you're neurotypical.
No. What's that?
And you're neurotypical, you describe it.
And I'm neurotypical, right. But I love musicians. Most of my friends are musicians. I get crushes on musicians. I'm fanatical about music. So no, I don't play anything. But Oberlin was a great place to be because you could walk over to the conservatory any hour of the day, and there would be 10 people playing Bach on the organ or whatever. And there was also lots of sort of more avant-garde stuff going on. This isn't avant-garde, but they had a gamelan, which is this Indonesian percussion orchestra, which was amazing. They had all kinds of people came through. Folk singers, and Jerry Garcia played, and it was Talking Heads played twice before they were big. I think their Talking Heads 77 I think had just come out. And so there was we saw Devo, there was a very, very broad range of every possible kind of music from all over the world. And so Oberlin was just a great place for me to be.
Right.
But no, I never did pick up instruments. It's one of the few regrets of my life.
Oh, it was never too late, man. It's never too late to pick it up.
Yeah, no, I know. What do you play?
Guitar. Very
And
poorly.
Who are your heroes?
You know, I don't really have a lot of guitar heroes. Most of my musical heroes are songwriters. Jason Isbell would be probably my greatest creative hero overall.
Yeah.
Of course, some obvious ones like Dylan. Mostly I get into song structure and lyrics. I get really lost in that.
Great.
Because I'm a very rudimentary guitar player, right? So I know 8 chords well, and I can fake a handful more if I have to, you know?
Yeah.
And that's about it. So it's mostly like when I write something, it's a folk song, you know, it's almost always protest music. It's almost
great. We need it. We need
it. Yeah. But
in fact, Crosby, you know, one of Crosby's frustrations actually is that he wishes he could write a song that would have the protest impact of Ohio. He's said that to me many, many times. Like,
wow.
He's almost praying to the muse, you know.
Right.
It's funny. He wrote a song called Capital, which was on an album called Sky Trails, I believe, just a couple years ago. And it was before the election, or a few years ago. It was before the election. And it's about how corrupt Washington is. And when I heard it, I thought, well, it's a little dark. I mean, Obama's president, you know, it's all fine. Total prophecy, you know, like Dylan-esque prophecy. Like Capital is one of the best songs about our current historical moment, and it was written while Obama was still president.
Wow. Gosh, it's amazing how much some of those songs just fit perfectly right now. Some of the songs that were written 30 and 40 years ago just fit. I just interviewed Chuck Prophet, and he has a song on his new record. Yeah, it was great. His new record's wonderful, and I guess it comes out next week, but it's absolutely outstanding. And he has a couple of, you know, anti-Trump songs, as he called them, and one of them isn't really an anti-Trump song so much as it's about Nixon, and it's called Nixon Land. It's actually been released as a single. Because Chuck grew up in the same town that Nixon was from.
Whittier, was it?
I can't remember the name off the top of my head.
Yeah.
But all that stuff that he talks about, and especially talking about Nixon, it's just like, Jesus Christ, all of this is so relevant right now. But it feels I wasn't around then. It feels worse to me than what I've read about. You know.
Can I give you a tip?
Yeah.
Check out a song that Ry Cooder recorded, I don't know, probably 6 years ago or something, called I Want My Crown.
Okay.
And it describes Donald Trump to a frickin' T.
Wow.
Like it's another example of total prophecy.
Wow. All right. I'll do that. Thank you. You mentioned that I want to talk about Freak Flag Flying, your podcast with David. That was so wonderful, and I enjoyed so much. You mentioned earlier that may spark something in my mind. You said you developed crushes on musicians. You also talked about your relationship with David. You ever had a crush on David? Was that ever part of the equation?
Funny. I don't, which is probably good.
Yeah.
But I adore him completely. Yeah. He's beautiful to me. I love him. You know, when my phone vibrates in my pocket and I pick it up and it says David Crosby, which it does almost every day, it's like, instead of saying like, oh shit, you know, it's it's amazing. Wow. Awesome. You know? And, but I was never, God, I don't want to say this, you know, I was never like physically attracted to him.
Oh, okay.
Young Stephen Stills, on the other hand. But, I mean, Stephen was just beautiful.
Yeah,
look at that cover of his first solo album, "Sitting in the Snow" or whatever.
Right.
Like he was a freaking stud.
Yeah.
David, I do not. Let me think if there are any crushes I can. You know, I used to have a crush on Jackson Browne. Nick Drake, come to me. You know? Nick Drake is like one of the most beautiful guys I ever saw in my life. You know, Joni Mitchell. It's like, believe me, I wouldn't have said no. You know? Right. And many didn't. They all said yes. You know? And you know, I hope Joni's doing well because she's in recovery from a terrible aneurysm.
Right.
But her music, David always
Incredible.
says that Joni was the best songwriter of their generation, like easily up there with Dylan. And I can't disagree. I mean, she's unbelievable.
I mean, I can't.
Her stuff is very relevant now too.
Right. I mean, when you listen, like all those records, when you listen to Blue is obviously the most revered one, I guess I would say. But like when I listen to Blue and we have a copy on vinyl, it's like when I put it on, I can't do anything else. Like I just need to sit and spend time with that music and that record and what she's saying and how she's saying it.
Yeah. Yeah. And her later stuff, which has been somewhat overlooked, is very prophetic of this era. Like a song called Dog Eat Dog, which is very much about like, end stage capitalism. She's got a song called Passion Play, which very much describes the religious hypocrisy of our era, where, you have evangelicals being really pro-death, even though they call themselves pro-life.
Right.
And so she is someone who, even though, I can't say she's underappreciated because everyone knows she's a, freaking diva, but she, I think, is going to be up for a big reappraisal after she goes, in the same way that everybody now knows that Miles Davis was, beyond belief, one of the greatest artists of the 20th century in any medium.
Right.
And I think she's eventually going to be recognized as way ahead of her time.
Right. I hope so. She certainly deserves it. The Freak Flag Flying, the podcast that you had with David, was wonderful. And folks should go listen to it, especially if they're enjoying this conversation. But I want to ask you about it, especially being a podcaster. I'm interested in like how the idea came about, and then how much were you were producing it, if I'm not mistaken, and like
well, not really. It was produced by Osiris Media.
Okay.
But I can tell you how it happened because it's a really cute story.
Nice.
Actually.
Yes.
And I'll tell you stuff that was invisible in the podcast.
Cool.
This is how it happened, and that alone is a great story. I was seeing Trey Anastasio, who is the lead guitarist of Phish. He had a solo show with a band called Ghosts of the Forest at the Greek Theater.
Mm-hmm.
And when I was young, I wrote a book about the Grateful Dead called Skeleton Key, a Dictionary for Deadheads. And there was this band that I kept hearing about. There was this new young band, and everyone was saying, oh, they're the next Grateful Dead, So that band was Phish. They were from Vermont, but they were not big yet. Mm-hmm. And so I liked them. I'd gotten turned on to them very early on. And I thought, oh, they're cool. And I liked their lyrics. I thought they were goofy. Mm-hmm. Maybe not profound, but goofy.
Right.
And so I got in touch with the young lyricist, Tom Marshall. And we had a hilarious exchange, which made it into the book, Skeleton Key. And we were kind of buds. But then something funny happened to both of us. We both got famous, basically. Phish became, they could sell out Madison Square Garden for a month, and not play a single repeat, My book, NeuroTribes, became an international bestseller in 20 languages. And, so we just kind of like drifted apart. Nothing bad, but we drifted apart. So I'm in the Greek Theater waiting for Ghosts of the Forest, and I see Tom Marshall, who's an extremely handsome guy, walking through the crowd, and somebody said to me, look, there's Tom Marshall. And I said, oh, yeah, that's cool. We used to be buds, but I'm sure he doesn't even remember me, Mm-hmm. And then talking to my friend, next thing I know, I feel this huge bear hug, and it's Tom. And he remembered me, and he was like, dude, we have to get you to do a podcast for Osiris Media. So I did not, people are always trying to get me to do regular podcasts. Maybe I should, actually.
I think you should.
Well, in any case, I knew that I had one in me with David,
Yeah.
So I called David. He was into it. I flew down to where he lives in Santa Ynez, near LA, Central Coast, and spent almost, I think, 5 days, really, at his house. So there I am, like sleeping, in this little sort of a guest cabin, or something. Sleeping in this cabin. On the wall is, the original lyrics of Guinevere in his handwriting.
Wow.
Pictures of him with Obama. It's like, holy moly, like all these like holy relics of, kind of, baby boomer, whatever, like all around me, And David and I had a blast. He loves to eat. He loves to smoke pot. So do I.
Uh-huh.
We had a great time. We went out to restaurants. And then for a few hours every day, we would go to the studio of this friend of his named Joel Jacks, who's a professional engineer. And we would talk, The first day we both got high, I realized, no, somebody needs to steer, So the second day, Crosby whips out the blunt, and I'm like, David, I'm actually going to pass, And we got into some really tough stuff because I knew that since I was his friend, that I would be able to ask him about things that if normally the press asks him, he gets pissed off or gives one of his routine answers or something like that. And so I knew that I would be able to get under the skin of his normal public mask, and that he would be able to be honest with me about stuff like how he feels about Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, because there's been tremendous bad blood between them in recent years, and that makes me sad,
Right.
And I know Nash as well, and they've been feuding for years, and it's sad to me. So I got into all this stuff. He made some comments about Jerry Garcia that as soon as he said them, I knew they would become immortal. And so we had a blast. And, then it flew back, it aired, everyone loved it. It turned out to be an enormous amount of work. I also got to play all this unbelievably rare music that the world had never heard, because I said to David right before I left Santa Ynez, I said, David, I'm going to play a bunch of unofficial recordings of yours on the show. And if you say no, I don't care. So I did. I played, everything from him sitting in with Steely Dan to play Wooden Chips in New York,
that.
which I had seen. I had been there.
Wow.
And, just a Birds demo, like, tons of stuff. And so it was a real treat for everyone, including me and David.
What kind of preparation were you doing for it? Thank you for all of that. That's so fun. What kind of preparation were you doing? Were you writing down questions? Did you have an outline of where you wanted to go? Or were you just like, were you all just rapping basically?
We were just rapping, but it's an unreproducible experiment because I've been preparing for it my whole life.
Right.
It's like, I thought I would ask the things that I thought most fans would want to know about. And I don't mean just fans, I mean like crazy Crosby obsessives.
Right.
They're out there.
Right.
So I asked those questions. And, I let his responses guide us, really.
Right.
I like to think I'm a good listener. And so I listened, and we both steered. And it was
That's
good.
awesome. You guys bonded over technology with exchanging the messages and things like that. And technology is such a huge part of your life. You've written for Wired for many years, and
I did. I no longer do, but yeah.
Okay, you did write for Wired for many years, and you're it's very tied to your life. Technology is, but you also meditate. And I wonder, because a lot of times those two things for me in my life are at odds, right? The constant checking of my Twitter specifically, Instagram for that matter, email even. And now I have 45 email accounts of various types, for work and for this and for that. And so at all times those things are at odds. Is that true for you also? Or does one get in the way of the other?
Except, if meditation, I'm an old student of Zen Buddhism.
Mm-hmm.
I started meditating because Allen Ginsberg told me to. I was Allen's student when I was a teenager and then became his teaching assistant. And one day he was teaching a course at Naropa University, it's called now, in Boulder, Colorado. And Naropa is a Buddhist university. So he asked the class, how many of you have signed up for meditation instruction? And, a few shy hands, went up. And he said, you're all amateurs in a professional universe. And so I didn't want to be an amateur in a professional universe. So I signed up to learn Zazen, Zen sitting meditation, from a guy named Maizumi Roshi, who was the head of LA Zen Center. And I haven't stopped, basically. I took a hiatus for a couple years, but a Dutch friend of mine, sort of, I don't want to say shamed me back into it, but, I was really missing it. If I don't meditate every day, it's like not brushing my teeth. Yes, I turn the phone off, and when I don't turn the phone off and I hear those pings, which come into my life every 5 minutes, it's like, I forgot to turn the phone off.
Yeah.
But meditation turns out to be a very basic tool for living in this crazy world without going crazy. It has kept me more sane. It reminds me to be more compassionate. I don't want to project a bunch of stuff onto meditation because, in a way, the best thing about it is that it's wordless and can't really be boiled down to a set of, well, this is what meditation does for you.
Right.
Anybody who's saying that is bullshitting you, basically.
Right.
Meditation itself is its own reward. And I do the simplest, most Zen 101 form of meditation, which is called breath counting. So I'm aware of my in-breath and out-breath and count. It works for me. By works, I don't mean it's turned me into a good person. I mean, I feel better when I meditate.
Right. Which will lead to you continuing to grow into a better person, right? Like if you're doing better, we're going to be better. Yeah, I think it's funny. It's interesting. Meditation comes up a lot on this show, but it's interesting how people have this sense of you can be good at it or not good at it, sort of like yoga. And it's like, no, that's not really, that doesn't, no, you can do it. And if it works for you, awesome. And if it doesn't, then you keep trying, right? It's almost like,
right. Well, it's sort of the main excuse that I always hear. Even Crosby told me this, actually. He was like, well, I can't meditate because I can't stop thinking. That's a misconception. Yeah. As the poet Gary Snyder said to me in a class, you can't stop thinking. The brain makes thoughts the way a Mr. Coffee machine makes coffee. And so it's like, once you realize that it's not about stopping thinking, then you can do it. It's worth getting good, solid, simple meditation instruction from a good place. Okay. Like an established Dharma community, like mine is San Francisco Zen Center. If for a slightly different style, there's Spirit Rock. I don't do anything like visualization. It drives me freaking nuts to have a life coach or something, coaching me through my meditation. I want formlessness and luminous emptiness, and it's there for me on my breath. I don't need any fancy visualizations, but some people, it works for them.
There's a common thread there, Steve. Grateful Dead, jazz, formless meditation.
Oh, I know.
There's a common thread in your life.
No, I'm sure my whole life is about some very tedious, simple, kitschy slogan. I don't know.
What else? Your life is so fascinating. What else did you get from Ginsberg? Meditation is one huge legacy of your relationship with Allen Ginsberg. What other things did you learn? What did you take away from that relationship?
Well, he transmitted to his students an entire body of literature that was like the hipsters of literature going back to before Shakespeare, really. So William Blake, this visionary multimedia artist, hundreds of years before the multimedia term was invented. Lots of sort of insurgent tradition in literature, and a tradition of sincerity and truthfulness. And I would say that the notion that honest words can change the world was probably one of the biggest lessons that I got from him. So my book, NeuroTribes, which is a history of autism and the concept of neurodiversity, was very much inspired by Alan's greatest poem. And everyone thinks I'm going to say Howl, but I'm not.
I thought you were
Kaddish.
going to say.
Yeah. I mean, Howl's great, but Kaddish is his poem for his mother, who had schizophrenia and who died in an institution of a botched lobotomy that Alan was forced to sign her in for as he was like 14, you know. So he had tremendous guilt about that. And he ended up writing this poem called Kaddish, which speaks up for all these people who have been marginalized in society and put in institutions. And NeuroTribes was very much influenced by that redemptive ambition.
That's a really good segue into writing. So I did read NeuroTribes and I loved it. And one of the things that stands out to me about your writing is that you're taking, like, there's a lot to synthesize there when you talk about the history of autism and neurodiversity. There's a ton of stuff, and some of it can get kind of clinical, but you manage to make it remain narrative and compelling, and it clips along. I guess I have a couple of questions. One is how you, where the inspiration strikes. So for that one, there are a couple of things, and you talk about it in the introduction to the book, but for your writing projects in general, where inspiration strikes typically, and then how you go about taking these like scientific concepts and making them clip along the way you do in your writing.
Well, the very first moment that I thought I might be a writer, I remember walking home from school. I was probably in like 5th grade or something, maybe even younger, 4th grade. And I noticed that there was this sentence in my head that seemed to keep unschooling. You know, it was like, there was like this voice in my head that was like saying words all the time. And I thought like, oh, that's interesting. You know, I wonder if that means I'm supposed to be a writer, you know? Wow. And then a teacher, Miss Prince, wherever she may be, told me to enter a poetry contest for New York City students run by Stanford University. And so I wrote my first poem. And I remember when I was writing it, I had a very distinct feeling of like, well, I suck at sports. I'm a klutz. I'm always the second to last pick, you know, like, you know, always the second to last pick. You know, I just felt inept, basically. I felt inept at everything, almost, really. Yeah. And I was constantly bullied. I was fat, you know. The kids, like, knew I was gay before I was, you know, or before I knew, you know. So, you know, I just felt like the world was not set up for me, you know, and I basically suck at everything. But here I am writing this poem, and it's like, wow, this is cool. Like, I felt like I could do it. I felt like there was something I could do. And that poem ended up going to Expo 67, where it was aired in the Monsanto exhibit or something.
How cool.
Yeah, sort of. And so that was my first taste of fame, if you will. Right. It was like going to an ad agency in New York, you know, like big shot ad agency, and having my portrait taken or whatever. And so I finally figured out something I could do, you know. And so that continued into studying with Alan and going to Naropa and really being a serious poetry student for a couple of, you know, I wrote nothing but poetry almost into my late 20s. Really.
Oh, interesting.
But poetry frustrated me ultimately because I was never sure how good I was. And the poetry world was so political that if you gave a reading, all your friends would say, oh God, that was amazing. Yeah, they'd say that for everybody
right.
who was their friend, who was in their club, whatever club it might be. Mm-hmm. So I felt like I could never, I didn't have any absolute standard against which I could measure myself, you know? So I didn't know if I was even good. And looking back, it's funny, I looked back at a poetry manuscript that I haven't looked at in a decade, that Alan, actually, his handwritten notes are in the margins. And I thought, well, this kind of sucks, actually. It's like imitation Alan, you know. But eventually what I found was that all the craft that I learned under Alan writing poetry, and that I learned studying poetry, I got a master's degree in English literature, was useful in prose. And in prose, I could make things happen in the world. Like once I started appearing in San Francisco Chronicle and whatnot, my words could have an immediate effect. Although, a funny little anecdote, I once had a story about Allen Ginsberg, actually, published in the Sunday magazine. It was the cover story. And so there was a picture of me and Allen on the cover of the Sunday magazine of the biggest daily newspaper in San Francisco, back when newspapers were a thing.
Right.
And so I was all thrilled with myself, you know, wow, I'm on the cover of this magazine. And then like 2 days later, I'm standing on the street and this wind is blowing a piece of paper up the street and it's my picture. You know, and I suddenly realized, like, well, it all passeth away. Fame is fleeting. But, you know, so then I wrote NeuroTribes, which I was almost certain everyone would hate for various reasons. I knew the anti-vaccine people would hate it because I showed that their whole entire trip is based on lies and BS.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that autistic people might not like it because I'm not autistic. I thought parents might not like it because it's not like, you know, top 10 tips to make your child act like he's not autistic, you know.
Right.
It was very positive about certain aspects of thinking differently. Yeah. And, you know, so for 5 years I was having anxiety attacks, unable to sleep. But then it came out and, you know, frankly, I mean, some people hated it, sure. The anti-vaxxers certainly hated it.
Sure.
But mostly everybody loved it. It won the Samuel Johnson Prize in Britain, which is their major nonfiction prize that a science book had never won before.
Wow.
I spoke at the United Nations. I mean, it was like being shot out of a cannon, really, you know. So that was really good. And there's a certain kind of lack of self-confidence that I probably am now recovered from.
Oh, good. Wow. Well, it's wonderful. And it helped me, just as someone who works with families who have autistic children a lot and works with autistic children. It helped me a lot to just rethink things, you know, like just kind of rewired the way that I approach those relationships. And I'm looking forward to, I mean, I just finished it, so a month ago or whatever. So I'm looking forward to seeing, you know, how much of an impact it has on my actual interactions with autistic kids, because it certainly rewired the way reading the book changed the way I think about those interactions, you know, like even as little as things like the term high functioning, right, being something that is very commonly used, but is not necessarily accurate or appropriate, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So
yeah, as an autistic person, Laura Tasanchik put it, is the problem with terms like high functioning and low functioning is that if you're called low functioning, then your attributes or strengths are ignored, and if you're called high functioning, then your challenges are ignored, and that's really important.
Right. Have you ever? Is any of your poetry published anywhere? Like
yeah, sure, in little anthologies, but
okay.
I mean, I haven't written a poem in, I don't know, a very long time. But, you know, I was part of the kind of poetry, you know, there's always this sort of simmering, you know, young poets, you know. This was sort of before poetry slams, so I was never into that.
Okay.
But, I mean, they can be good. They can be awful, but they can be good.
I just always thought they were always around.
Yeah, no, you know, well, I mean, they're kind of based on, you know, Beat Generation,
right,
or Kerouac, you know.
Right.
But they can be a little bit lax in the craft department. You know, they can be great, but I mean, the problem with poetry is that it's the reason why I stopped writing it. There's no absolute standard to measure yourself against. And poetry evaluation is so subjective while not being entirely objective. Like, there are actually good poems and bad poems, and it's possible to tell which is which. But poetry evaluation is so subjective that even if you have a university professor who's a published poet telling you that your poem is good or not, it may be the opposite.
That's really interesting.
There's no way of knowing.
Do you think music is similar in that way?
I do, but yeah, I always feel awkward when, this is almost like saying too much, but I always feel awkward when, like, a friend of mine who I really like, it's like, oh, I just wrote this song, like, it's like, holy Gewalt,
Yeah.
Like, what do you say? You say, like, thank you, that was really nice,
It's so hard, man. I in the position that I've put myself in with this show and with my writing about music, I often get asked for feedback on music, and I don't feel qualified to give it. If I love it, I will gush about it, and I feel comfortable gushing about it. If I don't love it, I don't know what to say.
Right. I know. When people, like, I get like about 5 requests a day to blurb books, no exaggeration.
Wow.
And, I just say, like, no, I can't say yes or no until I see it. And unless I love it, I'm not going to say anything,
That's a good way to do it.
Yeah. But, the problem then is there are tons of people out there who've worked very hard on their books for years. And then I read it and it's like, no,
Oh, yeah.
And then they just don't hear from me. And I feel like kind of a douche, but
But what are you going to do? I mean, I guess when people ask for feedback, I guess you can feel comfortable giving it, but I don't, I guess we should feel comfortable giving it if someone's asking for it. Right. But I just, for whatever, I don't know if maybe that's a confidence thing about, especially when it comes to feedback on something like music or writing, something that I also do. It's like, it's kind of harder for me to, it's almost like, I don't want to jinx myself, right? Like,
I know what you mean.
That feedback.
Yeah. Well, I do feel qualified to evaluate writing about autism in particular. I feel semi-qualified to evaluate poetry, but in a way I can't be absolutely confident. But with autism, I know the history of it in such detail. And I know what is considered important by autistic people in the neurodiversity movement, that I feel confident in evaluating a manuscript about that. And plus, the depressing truth is that if you become good at something, you see that the mistakes that are made in that realm are very common. It's like autism books that are bad are oftentimes bad in the same ways.
Interesting. Yeah.
Like, if I open the book, which has happened like a dozen times now, if I open the book and it's like the first scene is like, his poop was smeared all, no. Sorry, I don't care what the rest of the book says. If the first autistic character in your book is pooping, or something, no. So anyway.
Oh my goodness. Oh, Steve, thank you. We always end on, you've given me so much time. It's been great. We always end on what you're getting down on. So, like, what art are you consuming? What are you listening to? What are you maybe reading, maybe a film you've seen lately that got you fired up?
Sure. Let me think of what, well, I started watching Lovecraft Country the other day. That's it's intermixes racial, social history, history of oppression and racism in the South with wild monster movie stuff, it's complete science fiction horror. And in that sense, it's very innovative. And I thought it was really interesting. There's only been 1 episode aired so far.
Like a District 13 kind of thing?
Say it again, please.
Like a District 13 kind of thing?
Yeah, kind
That
of,
Peter
yes.
Jackson film? Yeah.
Except this is with actual black people rather than
Oh, okay.
aliens. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the great thing is that, I mean, the monsters are, no spoilers, but they're not pretty, those monsters.
Right.
But the real horror is racism.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's, I think, a very valuable point. What am I listening to? Well, I've been listening to actually tracks from Crosby's next album.
Awesome.
But I listen to a lot of stuff. Like now I'm going to, because the cello player who I had in my backyard yesterday played a bunch of pieces I'd never heard of. I'm going to check those out.
Awesome.
And then what I'm writing is I have a contract for another book. Like everybody's projects, it's been kind of delayed by the pandemic. But my next book is the story of cystic fibrosis. The book is called The Taste of Salt. And why is that a story? It's a relatively rare condition. It's a story because 40 years ago, if you got cystic fibrosis, you were dead. It was a terminal diagnosis. You would die as a baby. But people came together and developed ways to keep people with cystic fibrosis alive into their 30s, 40s, and 50s, including one of my very best friends, one of my favorite people on earth, a guy named Phil Weishar, fellow Deadhead, real sweetheart. I love him. And I had known him for several years through Facebook, like Deadhead Connections. And, one day I came out to him as gay and I hoped he didn't freak out. And he was like, oh, that's no problem. By the way, I have this disease called cystic fibrosis.
Oh, wow.
So I realized I didn't know that much about it. And they have just this year is a very mixed year for people with cystic fibrosis because they're very vulnerable to infection. So COVID is a nightmare for them.
Wow, yeah.
But, and in fact, everybody, as Phil told me the other day, 2020 was the year that everyone got cystic fibrosis because everybody now has to be very uptight about infection, as people with cystic fibrosis have been. But it was also the year that this drug, and I'm a very cynical, skeptical science writer, ex-writer for Wired. I never use this word. This drug called Trikafta is a miracle drug, and I'll tell you why. Phil the last time I went to see him in Cleveland, he was diagnosed the day I got there with so-called end-stage cystic fibrosis. He's in his mid-30s. He was going to die. He was going to be listed for transplant, and lung transplants are tough to survive. Like they're not like heart transplants. They're much more difficult. And we literally, we didn't quite say the word goodbye, but our conversations were very real and grounded, He got Trikafta later that week. This is a little gross, but it's a true thing about cystic fibrosis. Most people with CF have so much bacteria in their lungs that their mucus is green if they cough it up, which they're supposed to do all the time. Phil's mucus has been green for a couple of decades. He took Trikafta for 2 days. His mucus was clear.
Wow.
And he ran a 5K the other day. He ran a 5K.
Wow.
And he was listed for death, basically. So it's a very exciting story. Because of the pandemic, all my research trips to Europe had to be canceled. So the book is probably going to end up being delayed. Probably won't be out for a couple of years. Okay. NeuroTribes was supposed to take me a year and a half. It took 5. But I need to make money, particularly because all my gigs have dried up because of the pandemic. So anyway, thank you so much, Jason. It's so nice of you to be so generous with your time.
Thank you so much, Steve. This was such a pleasure. I really appreciate it.
Thanks so much, buddy.
All right, man. Take care.
See you.
Bye.
Trying to make things right toward pick a poison and dream it all away, pick a poison.
Steve Silberman, y'all. Thank you so much, Steve. Thank you all for listening. Thank you for supporting the show, telling friends about the show, tweeting about the show, mentioning it on Facebook. I'm sure you are, hopefully. We don't have Facebook anymore. But hopefully you're over there on Facebook mentioning the show. You're on Instagram talking about it. And all of those are just free, painless ways to help us out. Give us a rating on your podcast app. Subscribe so you don't miss an episode. Those make a big difference as well. And thank you so much again just for continuing to be such incredible fans and friends of the show. I'm just so grateful we get to have guests like Steve Silberman. I mean, it's just such an honor and so incredible to think about how far this show has come in 3 years. We just celebrated 3 years. We had a 3-year celebration for our Patreon patrons, patreon.com/Marinade podcast. If you want to join the community, we had the second of our happy hours, and it was so much fun. And we just did it on Zoom. And this time I had a surprise where my good friend Jordan Foley, the incredible songwriter, showed up and played a few songs and talked to us and answered some questions. It was really cool. So I'm thinking about making that a much more regular thing. So maybe once a month we could have kind of a mini concert and hang and just check in. I mean, it's crazy how much community there is. It's really heartwarming to me to see people who were otherwise not connected at all becoming friends through the Marinade. It's just incredible. So check it out if you can swing it. We have tiers starting for as little as $2 a month, which gets you most of the stuff on Patreon. For $10, you can get access to our Patreon exclusive show, Jason's Journey, where I talk about the moments that have and continue to shape my creative life. All right, y'all, it's time for what I'm getting down on. Before I get into what I'm getting down on, stick around to the end. I've got another surprise for you. I've got a treat for you. Our good friend Patrick Hagerman sent me a song the other day. Patrick is a really wonderful songwriter based here in Orlando. You can find some of his stuff on YouTube. There's a few songs up there, a few videos where you can catch his music. He is just a really witty songwriter, and he writes these kind of heavier tunes as well, but sometimes he'll just leave you in stitches with the stuff that he writes almost off the top of his head. But he sent me one called "I Won't Wear a Mask, I'm a Man." It's just wonderful. So I'll play it at the end. And give Patrick a little love on social media as well. He's on Twitter, Facebook. I assume he's on Instagram too, but you can find him everywhere. Hagerman Music, and he's also got a merch store where you can find some really cool stuff, really cool T-shirts and yoga pants and coffee cups, all kinds of stuff. All right, now it's time for what I'm getting down on, the segment of the show where I talk about the art that is inspiring me at the moment. Phantom Thread was recommended by Steve on one of his social feeds. And so, when he recommends art, I tend to pay attention. I watched it, and it's just stunning. I'm not going to say no to a film starring Daniel Day-Lewis anyway, but he stars as a famous dressmaker in 1950s London, who takes on a young waitress that is portrayed absolutely brilliantly by an actress named Vicky Krieps. I'm so sorry if I'm messing up that name, but she's wonderful. Krieps. So her character is taken on as his muse. Paul Thomas Anderson directed it. Johnny Greenwood, famously of Radiohead, scored the film. It's just every aspect of this film is overwhelming. It's visually stunning. The acting is sublime. It's a near perfect film, and so I highly recommend if you haven't seen it. Phantom Thread. I've been listening to a lot of different stuff. A lot of Nitty Gritty Dirt Band. I knew Nitty Gritty Dirt Band back in the 90s, Fishing in the Dark, and some of their famous country hits, but I went back and listened to the deeper part of their catalog, their first couple of records. Uncle Charlie and His Dog Teddy is just an outrageously beautiful piece of art. I am crazy about it. I keep listening to it. And then they had this whole Circle series where they just get these heavyweights of Americana, rock, folk, country music, and put these records together that are absolutely beautiful. I mean, just incredible musicians, great stuff. And then I'm reading John McEwen, who played banjo in Nitty Gritty Dirt Band and has had a successful solo career as well. Reading his memoir, The Life I've Picked, which is really interesting. I mean, from him being friends with Steve Martin, working at a magic shop in California and having a lifelong friendship, to playing in the Soviet Union, the first American band to play in the Soviet Union. There's just so many wild stories from this guy's life that are super interesting. So that's been a fun read as well. And so those two things, of course, football is back. I'm not sure if that counts as art. So I'm watching a ton of football, using hours of my Sunday, not writing or creating anything, but watching grown men commit legal batteries against each other. But I've also been trying to make sure I just resubscribed to The Atlantic. I'm trying to make sure that I'm balancing keeping up with what's going on in the world while also maintaining my sanity. It's it's an evergreen problem, or challenge, but I think I've gotten it down a little bit, and I thought I'd just briefly touch on it in case somebody else is kind of going through a similar struggle. What I've done is I've kind of like made sure that I'm using my social media in a more in a more responsible way, I guess is the best way to put it. I'm just trying to ration my social media usage. So I just kind of set a rule for myself, which is I don't touch social media till I'm done with my day, basically, right? So I get up and I do my workout, I do my morning pages, I eat breakfast, I go to work my day job, and then come home, and if I have something else I need to do, I do that first. Now, am I perfect at this? No, but it has been helping a lot. I took all the apps off my phone that had social media except Instagram, just because you can't really use Instagram unless it's on your phone, and I don't want to keep downloading it and deleting it. But I don't have Twitter on my phone anymore, so I have to be in front of my computer or pull it up on the browser, which is a pain in the ass on my phone. And I just cut the cord on Facebook entirely, which was a great decision. And those of you who are still on Facebook, I highly recommend getting off of it and never turning back. But what that has done is it has allowed me to be more purposeful in what I'm consuming. And, I still love Twitter. I mean, absolutely love it. So being able to use it in a way that's a little more responsible has driven me to things like The Atlantic that I used to read religiously before I spent so much time on social media. So I'm trying to seek out those experiences where I'm reading something like The Atlantic that's really keeping up with what's going on in the world and really putting out some great content. And so that publication specifically has been a big part of my life for a long time, but I'm really grateful for it right now and what they are doing to try and keep this democracy afloat, y'all. Hang on, vote in November. Speaking of which, I got a Patrick Hagerman tune for you, exclusive, I'm pretty sure. I don't think you can hear this one anywhere else, but Patrick's a wonderful guy and a great songwriter, so go check him out on the interwebs and enjoy this tune. Until next time, if you can swing it, go out and create something. If not, don't beat yourself up about it. Cheers, y'all.
I won't wear a mask, I'm a man. This virus is only God's plan to weed out the devil and take him to task. I'll die for my freedom, I won't wear a mask. You leftists and liberals, I wish you could see your obvious hatred of this country. Your psychotic socialist shepherds of shame have covered their faces, so you do the same. You won't find me wearing no N95. I want to be able to look in the eyes of like-minded Christians who trust in the Lord and want to see freedom restored. I won't wear a mask, I'm a man. This virus is only God's plan to weed out the devil and take him to task. I'll die for my freedom, I won't wear a mask. Ask Chester A. Arthur and William H. Taft. Ask Benjamin Franklin if he wore a mask. The answer is no, and I bet you know why. Have you ever heard the phrase, live free or die? So rally around, people, with patriot pride. Grab all your ammo, for freedom we ride. Let's march to the State House and on up the stairs, screaming for freedom with our faces bare. I won't wear a mask, I'm a man. This virus is only God's plan to weed out the devil and take him to task. I'll die for my freedom, I won't wear a mask. We'll weed out the devil and take him to task. We'll die for our freedom. We won't wear a mask. Tremendous, absolutely tremendous.